27,000 feet above occupied France, the air is so thin it burns the lungs. Through the crystal canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190, Oberleutnant Rolf Herr-Meichen watches them climb. Ungainly, bloated, almost comical in their struggle for altitude. He keys his radio, voice tinged with amusement. The Americana have sent us flying milk bottles. Below him, 16 American fighters lumber upward. Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, 7 tons of metal and fury, making their combat debut over Europe. To German eyes, accustomed to the elegant lines of Spitfires and the nimble dance of Soviet fighters, these machines looked wrong. Barrel-shaped fuselages, greenhouse canopies, wings that seemed too small for bodies too large. The Germans circle above like wolves studying wounded prey. They have no idea what's coming. Within 18 months, these flying milk bottles will become the sound of German nightmares. 8 Browning machine guns screaming death across the sky. But on this April morning, they are untested, unknown, and the men inside them are fighting in a machine they barely understand against an enemy that has been killing since Poland fell. The laughter hasn't stopped yet, but it will. The mathematics were already loaded in those broad wings. 3,400 rounds of ammunition, 6,000 rounds per minute combined rate of fire. Enough concentrated firepower to saw a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds. But numbers don't win dogfights. Experience does. And the Germans have been at war for 4 years. The Americans? 0 combat days. Major Donald Blakesley led the 335th Fighter Squadron that morning. Former Eagle Squadron, transferred from RAF Spitfires just weeks earlier. He knows what his men don't yet, that survival in the P-47 requires forgetting everything they think they know about aerial combat. The Thunderbolt is not a fighter in the traditional sense. It's something else entirely. While Germany pursued lightweight interceptors optimized for climb and turn, Republic Aviation created a high-altitude juggernaut that used mass, power, and firepower to rewrite the rules. It emerged from panic, June 1940, as France fell and German fighters swept across Europe. Alexander Kartveli, Republic's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent specifications from the Army Air Corps. They wanted something that could match the Luftwaffe's best. What Kartveli designed instead was a monster that redefined possible. "It will be a dinosaur," he admitted to his team, "but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The prototype that first flew on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone. At nearly 10,000 pounds empty, it weighed 65% more than its predecessor. The massive turbo supercharger system, with complex ducting running through the rear fuselage, gave it an almost pregnant appearance. Test pilots approaching it for the first time invariably asked the same question: "This thing actually flies?" Not only did it fly, it flew like nothing else at altitude. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, 18 cylinders producing 2,000 horsepower, could maintain full power at 27,000 feet where German fighters gasped for air. The turbo supercharger delivered sea-level performance in the stratosphere. But bringing it to war nearly killed more Americans than the Germans would. Major Hubert or Hub Zemke commanded the 56th Fighter Group during training at Bridgeport, Connecticut. Between September 1942 and January 1943, his unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents. The P-47 ground-looped on landing, torque-rolled on takeoff, dove with such enthusiasm that pilots discovered compressibility, their controls freezing as shock waves formed on the wings. Zemke initially despised the aircraft,
But those who mastered it discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma, described his first flight. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. That April morning over France, when the Focke-Wulfs finally dove to attack, the predictions seemed confirmed. The P-47s couldn't turn with them, couldn't climb with them, couldn't match their nimble handling. Hauptmann Josef Priller, commanding Jagdgeschwader 26, reported to headquarters after the encounter. The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indiana, fat targets pretending to be warriors. The statistics confirm German confidence. First month of operations, 14 Thunderbolts lost for only 3 confirmed German kills. The RAF quietly suggested the Americans reconsider their choice. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit. But something strange was happening that German intelligence failed to notice. The P-47s that were shot down had absorbed incredible punishment before falling. One aircraft returned on May 4th with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, shrugged off hits that would have stopped a liquid-cooled fighter cold. More significantly, when P-47s got their guns on target, the results were catastrophic. The convergence zone of 8 50-caliber machine guns created destruction German pilots had never experienced. Unlike rifle-caliber weapons or cannon with limited ammunition, the American fighter could maintain sustained fire for over 30 seconds. In aerial combat, that's an eternity. June 26, 1943, Forges-les-Eaux, France. The event that would begin changing everything involved Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron, and an encounter that would become legend on both sides of the conflict. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47s was returning from escort duty when 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagdgeschwader 26 bounced them from the sun. The Germans executed a perfect attack. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying tail end of the formation, was caught in crossfire. 21 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft in the first seconds. The canopy shattered, hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit, engine cowling torn away. Fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel, tried to bail out. The canopy was jammed. A cannon shell had exploded in the track, welding it shut. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. What happened next defied every assumption about combat damage tolerance. Despite having no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, a barely functioning engine that shook violently, and controls that responded only intermittently, Johnson managed to level the aircraft and point it toward England. The P-47 continued flying with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to falling debris. Then a lone Focke-Wulf 190 discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. Historical research has never definitively identified this pilot, though several names have been proposed based on German combat reports from that day. What followed was one of the most extraordinary encounters in aerial warfare history. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire with 4 20mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire cannon ammunition load. The German repositioned and fired again, this time with only machine guns, his cannon ammunition exhausted. He pulled alongside, staring in disbelief at the flying wreck. Johnson could see his face clearly. Young, blonde, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to something approaching fear. The German repositioned and emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still, it flew. He pulled alongside again, shook his head in apparent amazement, gave an informal salute, and peeled away, presumably out of ammunition. Johnson's P-47 landed at Manston with its engine failing on the runway. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. Another had detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had taken direct hits. The control cables were partially severed. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone of the fuselage, were shot through. Yet the aircraft had brought him home. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had underestimated their own creation. German intelligence receiving combat reports from Jagdgeschwader 26 initially refused to believe it. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment. But testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the impossible. By July 1943, American pilots were learning to exploit the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke had discovered the secret through brutal trial and error. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, initially seen as disadvantage, became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve even vertically. This speed could be converted to altitude in a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters helplessly behind. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, who would become one of America's first aces in Europe, developed what became known as boom and zoom tactics, though pilots called it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of engaging in traditional dogfights, P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet, higher than German fighters could effectively operate. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive, reaching speeds that made deflection shooting impossible for defending Germans. At the bottom of these dives, the American heavy machine guns would speak. German pilots who survived described it as facing a wall of lead. The combined firepower created an impenetrable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this convergence pattern didn't just fall, they disintegrated. August 17, 1943. The dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest penetration into Germany attempted to that date. Major David Schilling led the 62nd Fighter Squadron when they encountered a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyer aircraft, positioning to attack B-17s with heavy cannon and rocket armament. The twin-engine German fighters, heavily armed but less maneuverable, were the Luftwaffe's specialized bomber killers. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Heinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the May 110s who survived, later recounted in POW interrogation, "The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters, good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from fuselage, tail severed, the crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, a 110 became nothing. 8 Messerschmitt 110s were destroyed in less than a minute. The German pilots had never experienced such concentrated firepower. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 rounds total, weighing nearly 900 pounds. At convergence distance, typically set at 300 yards, all 8 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything in that zone faced 100 half-inch projectiles per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself was a revelation of American industrial capacity. While German fighters struggled with limited cannon ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds for a 20mm weapon, American pilots could maintain fire for over half a minute. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who would become the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect. When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half, the tail falling one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe discovered another horrifying reality. The P-47's performance improved dramatically with altitude, while German fighters suffered. The turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine maintained rated power output up to 30,000 feet. German fighters relying on mechanical superchargers saw performance degrade significantly above 25,000 feet. Oberlieutenant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, encountered this reality fatally on October 8, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190 sluggish and unresponsive in thin air. The BMW 801 engine, powerful at medium altitudes, was gasping for oxygen nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters were sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now an experienced combat pilot on his way to ace status, was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf with its elaborate nose art. Johnson's combat report was clinical. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philipp's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions on both the Eastern and Western fronts, couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? The German High Command ordered immediate investigation into the P-47's capabilities. The report, delivered to Reich Marshal Göring in November 1943, was sobering. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor included 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, half-inch bulletproof windscreen, and armored deflection plates around the engine. Most disturbingly, its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy 3 conventional fighters and still return home.
January 1944. A new variant began arriving in England that would complete the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47 D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller with paddle blades, 13 feet in diameter, with broad chord blades that bit into air like massive oars. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at an anemic 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, paddle blade variants could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. Hauptmann Heinz Nuck of Jagdgeschwader 11,
a veteran with over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variants in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced to formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart, nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The paddle blade propeller did more than improve performance. It changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive thundering roar created by blade tips reaching supersonic speeds could be heard from miles away. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. The standard configuration carried two 108-gallon wing tanks or a 75-gallon belly tank, extending range to over 1,000 miles. The Luftwaffe's response was to concentrate on the bombers, hoping to inflict enough losses to stop the American daylight campaign. But this required flying through the P-47 escort screen, an increasingly suicidal proposition. German pilots developed grudging respect that bordered on fear for the big American fighters. Major Günther Rahl, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, mostly on the Eastern Front, survived an encounter with P-47s on March 6, 1944, that left him badly wounded. He later recalled in a post-war interview, "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun. Someone laughed and said, 'Here come the flying pigs.' Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed 3 of our fighters, just gone, transformed into burning debris. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death." The escort missions revealed another P-47 advantage: endurance. While German fighters operated at maximum power settings that consumed fuel rapidly, the big American radios could cruise efficiently at high altitude. Thunderbolts could remain with the bombers for hours, rotating top cover while maintaining enough fuel for combat and return. As more P-51 Mustangs arrived to take over long-range escort duties in spring 1944, P-47 units increasingly focused on ground attack, a role that would make them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The transition began in earnest in April 1944, as the Allies prepared for invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved equally effective against ground targets. Standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles, while sheer volume of fire could destroy soft targets in seconds. A 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that transformed the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry 2,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pounder under the fuselage, a bomb load equal to early war medium bombers. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying, Engines roaring, rockets screaming, then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. They called them jabos, fighter bombers, but these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. June 6, 1944. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader II, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported, "The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our Gruppe. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude.
You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain." In the weeks following D-Day, P-47 systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Even the feared 88mm flak guns struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. While devastating Europe, the P-47 was simultaneously proving its worth in the Pacific theater. The 348th Fighter Group, operating from New Guinea, discovered that the Thunderbolt's qualities were perfectly suited to the vast distances and harsh conditions of the Pacific War. Colonel Neil Kirby, commanding the 348th, developed tactics specifically for the Pacific. On October 11, 1943, Kirby led 4 P-47s against 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak, shooting down 6 enemy planes himself in a single mission, earning him the Medal of Honor. The Japanese, accustomed to fighting nimble but fragile American fighters, were unprepared for the P-47's combination of firepower and durability. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who encountered P-47s over New Guinea, later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, which could destroy a P-40 with a few hits, seemed to have no effect. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying, streams of heavy bullets that tore aircraft apart." The P-47N, developed specifically for the Pacific, featured increased fuel capacity, with wet wings holding 93 gallons each, extending range to 2,350 miles. This variant would escort B-29s to Japan, proving that the short-legged fighter of 1943 had evolved into a true long-range weapon. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, the P-47 had flown more combat missions than any other American fighter, 546,000 sorties. It destroyed 7,067 enemy aircraft, 3,752 in aerial combat, and 3,315 on the ground. It dropped 132,482 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, and it brought its pilots home. The final tally was staggering. For every P-47 lost in combat,
American pilots claimed nearly 5 enemy aircraft destroyed. The survival rate of P-47 pilots was among the highest of any fighter in the war. But numbers don't capture what the Thunderbolt truly represented. It was the manifestation of American industrial might and engineering pragmatism triumphing over European tactical doctrine. It proved that you didn't need to outturn the enemy if you could outpower, outgun, and outlast them. It demonstrated that a pilot who could return home to fight another day was worth more than a dozen who died in agile aircraft. The German pilots who survived the war carried memories of that distinctive sound, the roar of paddle-bladed propellers and the thundering of 850 caliber machine guns. They remembered how their laughter had turned to terror, how the fat American fighters they mocked had systematically destroyed the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Robert Johnson, the farm boy from Oklahoma who survived that incredible June day in 1943, flew 69 combat missions and achieved 27 victories. He was never shot down. His Thunderbolt brought him home every time. Francis Gabreski became America's top ace in Europe with 28 confirmed kills, all in P-47s. He survived being shot down and captured and would later fly F-86 Sabres in Korea. Hubert Zemke, who learned to love the aircraft he initially despised, commanded the 56th Fighter Group to become the top-scoring P-47 unit in the European theater. His pilots accounted for over 1,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. They were the men who turned the flying milk bottle into a weapon. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt served in air forces around the world for decades after the war ended. Some flew combat missions into the 1960s. Museum examples still fly today, that distinctive roar still audible from miles away, a sound that once meant salvation to Allied ground forces and terror to German soldiers. The last combat veteran P-47 pilots are gone now. The generation that climbed into those cramped cockpits and mastered the art of boom and zoom has passed into memory. But their legacy remains in the sky, in every fighter that prioritizes survivability over agility, firepower over maneuverability, bringing pilots home over tactical elegance. April 8, 1943. The Germans laughed at the fat American fighters struggling for altitude over occupied France. By May 8, 1945, those fighters had helped destroy the Luftwaffe, liberate Europe, and rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. The men who flew them never forgot what that aircraft gave them: a fighting chance against impossible odds, and a ride home when the sky was full of lead. 7 tons of fury, 8 guns of thunder, and the sound of German nightmares. If this story moved you, if it made you remember the courage of men who turned mockery into mastery, subscribe and help us keep their legacy alive. The names of those who flew the Thunderbolt into hell deserve to be remembered.